Hi, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. And this is another Dump the Corruption show. Our topic for this show is Jeff Merkley and the filibuster. So I'll get right to it. There was a post that appeared in Common Dreams about Jeff Merkley's very long effort to do something about the filibuster. And this post will go over that post and also do some commentary on it. Oh, wow, look at all these ads here. Jeff Merkley versus the Senate is the title of a post by David Dayen, the editor-in-chief of the American Prospect, on January 30th, 2024. The Oregon senator's new book harnesses 15 years of fighting to end the filibuster. So there's Jeff Merkley. Photos by Francis Chung. And it's from Politico via AP Images. Senator Jeff Merkley, Democrat of Oregon, speaks during a press conference at the U.S. Capitol on May 3rd, 2023. Dave Dayen says, in the fall of 2009, I scheduled a call with the freshman senator to talk about his vote against Ben Bernanke for another term as Federal Reserve Chair. During the call, he made a reference to procedural difficulties when talking about the Affordable Care Act. I picked up on that. You've been in the Senate a year now. How do you think the process works? Quote, there's no question that the Senate has become dysfunctional, and it's not good for democracy, Jeff Merkley, Democrat of Oregon, replied. At that moment, interestingly enough, Democrats had 60 votes in the Senate. But even with enough votes to close debate on any policy bill, the process didn't work because the rules of the Senate gave the minority party so many tools to obstruct. Barely anything made the Senate floor. Amendments were almost non-existent because they required unanimous consent. Hundreds of executive branch positions were unfilled, and most of the senator's business involved waiting around, even with the supermajority. Last week, Jeff Merkley, who has a new book out called Filibustered, How to Fix the Broken Senate and Save America, told me that he wouldn't even have known that another option was possible if he hadn't served as an intern in Senator Mark Hatfield's office while in college. His job was to follow the floor debate for the Tax Reform Act of 1976. In an era before cameras and cell phones, Merkley had to watch the proceedings from the Senate gallery, run downstairs to brief Hatfield on amendment votes, and run back to the gallery to keep watching. He witnessed 125 amendments, all conducted on a majority vote basis in a few days. Senators debated a bill, tried to shape it, and then took an up or down vote on the overall legislation. Merkley has spent 15 years trying to get the Senate back to that state. If the stars align, next year could be the culmination of what can now be considered his life's work. but filibustered, co-written with Merkley's chief of staff, Mike Zamore, is the definitive document of that struggle. It reads like the work of someone who has finally honed his arguments through rhetorical combat with his fellow senators. It's full of great history and myth busting and an arsenal of explanations for why ending the filibuster as we know it would limit corruption, give all senators a voice in policy making, and bring coherence to American democracy instead of the alienation producing machine we have now. When we have people coming to Capitol Hill who work on democracy issues, Merkley said in an interview, quote, I say, your presentation is missing two critical words, filibuster reform, quote, unquote, and unquote again. As I wrote in my jaundiced-eyed look at American democracy, voters have flipped at least one chamber of Congress to the president's in 8 of the last 9 elections. Yet they almost never get the results they assume that change would lead to, and a large reason why is the filibuster. Quote, it's a formula for frustration and cynicism and the appeal of an authoritarian government, unquote, said Merkley. And quote again, the whole premise of democracy is if you fight for your beliefs and earn a majority, you can put your policies in place. It becomes a national experiment. If it's good, voters will reward you. If it's a dud, it'll get changed in the next cycle. We have no ability to conduct such experiments because of the minority veto. And while I fault the founding fathers for much of the imperfections of our democracy, they did not intend to create a legislative body that could literally not express the will of the majority. As Merkley explained, before we had the current Constitution, we had the Articles of Confederation and Confederated Congress, which needed 9 of the 13 states to agree to exercise its limited powers. Quote, when they tried to raise funds to pay pensions after the Revolutionary War, they couldn't do it. When they tried to raise funds to put down Shays' Rebellion, they couldn't do it. The Congress created by the Constitution was explicitly designed to not be hamstrung by the minority. The framers specified what types of actions would need a supermajority: treaties, impeachment, constitutional amendments, and expulsion of a member. James Madison wrote in Federalist number 58 that a supermajority for all policies would mean that the fundamental principles of a free government would be reversed. The power would be transferred to the minority. Quote, the early Senate had so many tools to make sure neither lengthy speeches nor filibuster-style obstruction would prevent the will of the Senate to go forward, unquote, Merkley said. The biggest of those tools, the, quote, motion on the previous question, unquote, the mechanism by which the House closes debate and votes, was scribbled out of the Senate rules by a fastidious Vice President, Aaron Burr, in 1805, because the Senate operated with such comity in those days, what Merkley calls, quote, the Senate Code, unquote, excuse me, that such a motion was never used. Even in the years between 1917 and 1964, a cloture vote, which cuts off debate, was voted on only 6 times, Merkley said. The filibuster was largely reserved for blocking civil rights for legislation on civil rights, which on its face should tell you something about the tool and who it serves. But today, thanks to growing ideological sorting and the ease with which the minority can obstruct, every single bill gets filibustered, usually twice, on the motion to proceed, to debate, and the motion to end debate. A successful fight to lower the threshold for cloture in 1975, an attempt to make the Senate work better, actually made things worse. Then Senator Walter Mondale agreed to make the threshold 3/5 of all senators rather than 3/5 of votes cast. This means that a 59-0 cloture vote in the Senate loses, and it allowed obstructionists to filibuster without lifting a finger. The filibuster went underground. With only the majority burdened by rounding up votes. The public doesn't know there's a debate going on. They just see nothing getting done. Because of time allotments built into the rules, each cloture vote can take up to a week. There's a tremendous amount of self-censorship in the Senate, where overwhelmingly bipartisan measures cannot get onto the floor because they would take too long. The path of least resistance is to do nothing, or because of reforms passed in 2013 to do executive branch and judicial appointments that can still take a while, but at least can ultimately get a majority vote. This robs a Senate majority of the ability to inspire their base by getting things passed. You don't see the Democratic agenda reflected in legislation in the Senate this Congress because it's too time-consuming. This makes the majority look weak and ineffectual, disconnects the relationship between elections and governing. Merkley notes that amendments, which can also be filibustered, have practically vanished in the current Senate. The ability to offer amendments means the powerful cannot hide, Merkley told me. Quote, now it's the reverse. He explained that under the unanimous consent rules, amendments that would lead to uncomfortable votes are routinely blocked. That puts legislation largely in control of leadership, who dictates what goes to the floor in backroom deals, quote, which means the majority and minority leaders can tell those powerful interests, quote, give us lots of money and we'll get your policy into the bill, unquote, unquote. Now, the Senate rules, in other words, facilitate corruption. The priorities of Republicans and Democrats mean that the rules work differently for each party. Merkley tells a story about budget reconciliation, a 1974 rule that created an exemption to the Senate supermajority for reducing the deficit. And it was twisted by the Gingrich-era Congress into something that can be used for tax cuts. A former Bob Dole staffer named Robert Dove, who became the Senate parliamentarian, approved that change. It's possible for Republicans to do tax breaks by simple majority, but they still maintain a veto over health care, housing, education, labor, civil rights, voting rights, and climate policy, unquote, Jeff Merkley said. Talk about a system rigged for the powerful, quote unquote. Merkley's reforms would end the, quote, disillusionment factory that is the modern Senate. He would eliminate the painless filibuster that just sets a 60-vote threshold for practically everything and institute a talking filibuster, forcing the minority to make the effort to hold the floor in full view of the public without being able to use dilatory tactics before taking an up or down vote. Senators would have leverage, but not a veto. He would also end the ability to filibuster the motion to proceed, which is just a way to begin debate on a bill and guarantee 10 germane amendments, 5 for each party. He would save time by ending cloture votes for nominations and moving directly to an up or down vote while cutting the 2 days it takes for a cloture motion to ripen and post-cloture time. Unclogging Senate procedure would allow more time for critical priorities and quickly pass bills that have broad bipartisan support. Because the House and Senate are divided, we haven't heard a lot lately about the filibuster, but we should hear about it in this and every election year as Democratic politicians make their pitches to the public. President Biden recently said at a rally, "Give me a Democratic House of Senators and a bigger Democratic Senate, and we will pass a new law to restore and protect Roe v. Wade," unquote. He knows that cannot be done without filibuster reform, yet the public continues to receive promises that do not lead to results, and those making the promises continue to expect people to believe in democracy. Quote, "I was at a campaign event hosted by John Legend," Merkley told me. Quote again, "After the two folks up for election gave policy presentations, John Legend got up and he said, quote, 'How are you going to get these policies passed given the filibuster,' unquote. I hope for every Democrat to get that question. Merkley has dealt with institutional resistance to fixing the Senate from the day he got there. But the sharpness on display in his book has broken that resistance down. In 2022, his proposal for a talking filibuster, the first actual debate on the matter in history, got 48 votes. Since then, John Fetterman, an avowed supporter of filibuster reform, makes it 49. If Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, the only no votes for Merkley's proposal, are out of the Senate next year and Democrats still have a majority, a tall order, as Merkley conceded with the Democratic House and President, they will probably have enough support to change the Senate and by extension change America. Said Merkley of the opportunity, "I'm going to work like hell." Correction, the previous version of this story said that Alan Fruman was the parliamentarian who allowed tax cuts under budget by reconciliation rules. It has been corrected to reflect that it was Robert Dove. Yeah, I have to say something about that. I have to say a couple of things about this. The first thing is, I'm all for filibuster reform. I don't even want to have a talking filibuster, though. I want to go back to the original Senate rules, which said that things are voted in or out by majority rule. That's what the Constitution says. There's no reason, in my view, for any filibuster. Okay, I also think that the limit on amendments to 5 for each party, or 10 amendments, is biased towards the two-party system. What happens if we start to get some independent candidates in the Senate? What happens if Green Party candidates happen to get elected, to the Senate? Are they to be allowed absolutely no amendments? Because the amendments only go to the major parties? I don't think that can be a rule. I think senators have to be free to put up amendments. As Jeff Merkley made the point himself, in earlier years, it was possible to get through hundreds of amendments in a few days. If we have to limit amendments, and we want to do it 5 each, for the major parties, then I think we should put in a provision for 3 each for minor parties that have any senators. That's not really too many amendments to handle. It wouldn't interfere with the efficiency of the Senate. It would bring us into a situation where it was possible to have amendments again and to debate amendments again. Furthermore, while I do agree with Jeff, that when the current rules work in such a way to consolidate power, okay, in the leaders of the parties, and to put them in a position where they can go to lobbyists and say, give me lots and lots of money and I can get your bill in to uh, get, I can get your policy into the various bills that go through. Okay, I agree. That's an invitation, okay, to corruption, and part of dump the corruption certainly should be to get rid of the filibuster, okay, or to limit it, okay, in a very severe way. Uh, so this is related, okay, to dump the corruption. Okay, but I also think that Jeff might be too optimistic in thinking that we'll be able to get his reforms on the filibuster through if only we get just a couple of more Democratic votes, okay, in there. Uh, because when it comes down to it, I think there are many more Democrats who still want to have the power of the filibuster around to block things they don't like. And I think there are likely to be other senators who will step forward. I'm thinking of Chris Coons. I'm thinking of John Tester. Okay, I'm thinking of Jeanne Shaheen. Okay, of Maine. Okay, I'm thinking of a number of conservatives who, for example, didn't want to see a minimum wage of $15 an hour. Okay, and they blocked it. Okay, and okay, there are lots of issues where people might not want to vote for filibuster reform because they value the power of blocking a vote, okay, on those issues. So I'm not as optimistic as he that if we got only a few more votes, that we'd be able to introduce, okay, the reforms that he wants to see. I also don't think his working like hell is going to do much. What I advocate for instead is the dump the corruption rule. Change 1/3 of the Senate so that 1/3 of the new senators are not beholden to big money. Change that. And then you'll be able to get his reform through with respect to the filibuster, and maybe even to get rid of the filibuster altogether. And maybe in addition, you'd be able to get court expansion in. So we have 15 justices rather than 9, 6 new justices. That would be a wonderful reform to change the course, okay, of the Supreme Court. So that's all I have to say about that for today. I don't know if there's anybody here. If there is, I will certainly give you a chance to. Oh, Dolores is here. Thank you for coming, Dolores. And thank you for sharing. If you don't have any comments, I'm going to cut this off now. And I will have a third stream tonight, which will be at 8 o'clock. I did have a stream, okay, at 10, but I had to abort it due to technical difficulties, and I had to delete it from Twitter, from Facebook, okay, on YouTube, so it's no longer on those particular channels. Hopefully, I can avert such technical difficulties, okay, in the future, and I certainly think that would be a very good thing. Let me stop the screen. Okay, anyway, I will see you later today, and I'll see you, Dolores, because if you have a show today, I will be there for your show as well.